You know that moment when your daughter gets up at her wedding reception and decides to turn you into the punchline of her big day? Well, that happened to me. But what came next flipped the entire room from laughter to dead silence in under half a minute. Imagine a picture-perfect venue, crystal chandeliers, everyone dressed like a magazine spread. My daughter Rachel looked breathtaking in her wedding gown. I sat there glowing with pride, watching her marry the man she loved. The reception was going beautifully, until Rachel took the mic. I thought she was going to give a heartfelt thank you speech. Instead, she smiled and said, "Let's take a moment to talk about my mom." Then she chuckled and added, "She's having what I guess you'd call a late-life crisis." The crowd giggled. She went on, throwing in finger quotes around empire as she described my business. People laughed louder. "She refuses to act her age," Rachel said, and the room roared. I kept a polite smile on my face while inside I wanted to sink into the floor. They were all laughing at what they thought was my silly little dream. But what none of them knew, not even Rachel, was that the most influential person in that room was quietly sipping champagne at table 6. And what happened next? Let's just say it changed the way everyone saw me, including my daughter. But to explain how Rachel's wedding became the single most satisfying moment of my life, I need to take you back 2 years. 2 years earlier, I was Diana Thompson, 60 years old, newly divorced, and completely unsure of what came next. After 3 decades working as an office manager, I was let go during a company restructuring, which was really just a polite way of saying they replaced me with someone younger and cheaper. For the first time in my adult life, I was alone and unemployed. Rachel, my daughter, was 32 and living with her fiancé, Jake. My ex had already moved on with a woman barely older than Rachel. Apparently, dating someone 15 years younger is the classic male midlife crisis starter pack. And me. I was sitting in my modest apartment wondering what in the world I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. There's something uniquely terrifying about turning 60 and suddenly being cut loose. You hit a crossroads. You either accept that your best days are behind you, or you dig in and decide maybe, just maybe, all those years gave you something valuable. I picked the second road. I launched a consulting firm, helping small businesses streamline their operations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid, honest work built from decades of experience. I named it DT Enterprises. Professional, clean, and it kept my personal name off the radar. But no one in my family took it seriously. Rachel would sigh and roll her eyes every time I mentioned a new client. "Mom, you're 60, not starting a tech startup in your 20s. She'd say Jake was even worse. He'd explain Marketing 101 to me like I was a child. My sister would chime in at family dinners with her usual charm. "Maybe it's time to get a real job, Diana." Even my friends tried to be supportive, but their words stung. "It's sweet that you're keeping busy," they'd say with a smile that barely masked the pity. What they didn't realize was I was good at this, really good. My clients were thriving, contracts were growing, and I was making more money than I ever had before. But every time I tried to share a success, my family acted like I'd just won a ribbon at a church bake sale. During that same time, Rachel was deep in wedding planning, and she made one thing painfully clear. "Please don't mention your business to Jake's coworkers," she told me. "Just say you're between jobs. It'll be less awkward." I agreed because I wanted her day to be perfect, but sitting there quietly footing half the bill, listening to people joke about my so-called midlife crisis, I started to realize something. This wasn't just a lack of support. They were embarrassed by me, not because I was failing, but because I refused to disappear quietly into middle-aged irrelevance. And that hurt more than any layoff ever could. The day of the wedding finally came, and it truly was stunning. Rachel had chosen a breathtaking venue, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and glittering chandeliers that looked like something out of a movie. I'd covered a good portion of the cost myself. Of course, everyone assumed that money came from my divorce, not the business they thought was a joke. That morning, I chose my outfit carefully. Elegant, understated pretty, but not enough to draw attention away from the bride. Rachel had reminded me twice not to bring up my consulting work around Jake's colleagues. Just blend in, Mom, she'd whispered at the rehearsal dinner. Jake's boss, Mr. Anderson, will be there with his wife, plus a bunch of people from the tech firm. These are serious business people. Okay, she didn't need to finish the sentence. I already knew she didn't want me talking about my little projects. I bit my tongue and nodded. Little projects. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Rachel looked like something out of a bridal magazine. Jake looked thrilled. And I cried, like any proud mother would, watching my daughter step into her new life. During the cocktail hour, I mingled quietly with relatives and steered clear of Jake's work circle. But I couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation. Venture capital this, scaling that, strategic alignment. I knew this world better than they could have guessed. Still, I kept quiet and smiled when introduced as the bride's mother. Then came dinner. Everything was moving along just fine until the maid of honor stood up. She began sweetly, reminiscing about childhood memories and how radiant Rachel looked. But then, her tone shifted. And now, she said, grinning, let's talk about the bride's mom. The crowd chuckled, especially Rachel's mom. She's been quite the character lately. I felt my stomach tighten. She's having what I guess you'd call a late-life crisis, the maid of honor continued. Laughter rippled across the room. At 60, she's decided she wants to build an empire. She even used air quotes. The laughter grew louder. We keep telling her to act her age, she added, but she just won't listen. She's out here trying to compete with people half her age in business. The whole room was laughing now, 200 people chuckling at what they thought was a harmless joke. But I was the punchline. I sat there, cheeks burning, smile frozen in place, as my daughter's best friend roasted me for sport. And hey, she finished with a wink. At least she's keeping busy and not just gardening like most moms her age. Right, more laughter, more applause. But the part that stung the most, Rachel. She wasn't embarrassed or surprised. She was laughing. She nodded along like she couldn't have agreed more. And then she stood up. I prayed she'd say something kind to offset what had just happened. But she didn't. Rachel took the microphone with a smile that didn't hint at the pain she'd just watched me absorb. Thanks, Amy, she said to her maid of honor. Yes, my mom has definitely been on a bit of an adventure lately. The room chuckled again. She insists she's building a business empire, Rachel continued. But we're just trying to help her understand that some dreams have expiration dates. When you're over 60, maybe it's time to be realistic about what's still possible. The laughter that followed was even louder. Jake's coworkers were nearly in tears. Mr. Anderson sat shaking his head, amused. Even the catering staff seemed to be stifling giggles as they cleared the plates. I wanted to vanish. More than that, I wanted my daughter to stop humiliating me in front of a room full of strangers. But Rachel wasn't finished. We still love her hobby, of course, she added, voice dripping with condescension, even if she talks about client meetings and business strategies like she's running some Fortune 500 company. That last line, that was the breaking point. The mockery in her tone, the way she dismissed me like a child playing pretend, it cracked something deep inside. This wasn't just a lack of support. This was cruel. And it was happening in front of people who actually mattered to my real business. Potential partners, industry executives, people whose respect could have meant something if they knew the truth. As Rachel wrapped up her speech to raucous applause, I felt like someone had poured concrete around my chest. I couldn't breathe. I thought the worst was over, but the evening had more humiliation to offer. After dinner, people began approaching my table, not with curiosity or interest but with the kind of syrupy sympathy reserved for failed talent show contestants. "Good for you," one of Jake's aunts said, patting my arm. "It's so brave to try new things at your age. Better to chase little dreams than sit around doing nothing," someone else added. Jake's coworkers weren't any better. When someone introduced me as Rachel's entrepreneurial mother, they nodded with the same bland politeness you'd use with someone handing out homemade soap. "Oh, that's lovely," one of them said. "My mother-in-law just started crocheting again. Great to stay busy. Like I needed something to keep me from watching daytime TV all day." But the lowest blow came from Jake himself. He pulled me aside during the reception, drink in hand, and smiled too forced. "Diana, thanks for being such a good sport about the speeches," he said. "I know Rachel was just having fun, but I hope you didn't take it too personally about your consulting thing." "My consulting thing," I echoed. He nodded. "Yeah, I mean, it's great that you're staying active. It's not really about building something huge at this stage, right? Just staying engaged." That was when I realized something terrifying. This man, my daughter's husband, actually believed I was dabbling, that I was keeping myself busy with pretend work. "Jake," I asked carefully, "do you know what I actually do?" He shrugged. "Rachel said you help local businesses with their ... paperwork, or something." "That's nice. Nice paperwork." He thought I was helping corner stores sort out filing cabinets. He had no idea. None of them did. I excused myself and walked straight to the restroom, where I locked the stall door and just sat there in silence. I didn't cry. I was past tears, but I was done. Done pretending. Done letting people I loved treat me like I was playing a game. When I came back out, I caught Rachel by the bar, chatting with one of her bridesmaids. She didn't see me, and maybe that was for the best. "Poor Mom," she was saying, her tone almost pitying. "She's been totally lost since the divorce. This whole business thing. It's just her way of feeling important again." I froze. Her friend nodded sympathetically. "That's rough," she said. "But hey, at least she's not one of those lonely moms who calls her kids every day crying." Rachel laughed. "Exactly. And honestly, I'd rather she play businesswoman than start dating again." Can you imagine? They both cracked up, and something inside me finally snapped. This wasn't just about being misunderstood. This was about being erased, belittled, dismissed as nothing more than a desperate woman clinging to the illusion of relevance. What Rachel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the business they kept mocking had quietly become something real. Very real. In the last 18 months, I'd acquired 6 companies. Not little mom and pop shops, real, scalable firms, one of them being a major player in the tech space. A company Jake would probably kill to work for, The irony was choking. While Rachel was worried about me embarrassing her in front of Jake's colleagues, I was the one signing their bonuses. I made it through dinner, barely. I smiled. I nodded. I thanked people for their kind words, even when those words were condescending. And I made a quiet plan to leave after the cake was cut. But then something happened that none of us saw coming. As I was sipping champagne near the back of the room, Mr. Anderson approached. Jake's boss. I'd been doing my best to avoid him all evening. Didn't want to subject myself to more polite small talk about staying active in retirement. But he walked right up to me. Mrs. Thompson, he said kindly, we haven't had the chance to meet. I'm Robert Anderson, Jake's supervisor over at Sterling Tech. My heart skipped. Sterling Tech. I gave a calm smile. It's Miss Thompson. Actually, I replied. And yes, I know who you are. He grinned. Jake mentioned you're in business consulting. That's great. What kind of work do you do? I looked at him, this man with no clue what was about to hit him, and said, I specialize in acquisitions and operational strategy. I work with companies on optimizing growth and scaling effectively. He nodded. Sounds fascinating. Mostly local businesses, I guess. Actually, I said, I focus on mid-sized firms in the tech sector. Companies preparing for scale, looking for capital and guidance. His eyebrows rose slightly. Really? That's quite the niche. How long have you been in that space? 2 years seriously, though I've been building toward it for much longer. He smiled politely. Impressive. Any clients I might recognize? I paused. This was the moment. I could keep downplaying. Or I could finally speak the truth. Actually, yes, I said, meeting his eyes. I recently finalized the acquisition of Sterling Technologies. His polite expression didn't even have time to shift, it froze mid-smile. He blinked once, then again. You ... what? He asked slowly, voice barely above a whisper. The deal closed 3 months ago. I replied calmly. He just stared at me, mouth slightly open, trying to catch up. You mean ... DT Enterprises? He asked, almost breathless. I gave a small nod. That's right. He took a full step back, eyes wide, champagne glass nearly slipping from his fingers. You're D. Thompson, he stammered. The D. Thompson. Yes, I said simply. The color drained from his face like someone had flipped a switch. I had no idea, he said. I mean, when Jake said his mother-in-law was into consulting, I figured ... double quotes. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. Miss Thompson, I am so sorry. I mean, wow, I had no idea. It's fine, I said softly. I keep a low profile on purpose. But he wasn't fine. He was unraveling in real time. He glanced around the room at the people still giggling at my expense, at the faces who had spent all evening treating me like a charity case with a hobby. Ma'am, he said, lowering his voice, this is ... deeply embarrassing. I mean, the way people have spoken to you tonight, if they had any idea ... double quotes. They don't, I said. Not even my daughter. He stared at me. She doesn't know. I shook my head. She thinks I help local shops with paperwork. His jaw tightened. That's insane. Miss Thompson, you've built a $50 million portfolio. You've acquired 6 companies in under 2 years. That's not just impressive, it's legendary. I could see people starting to notice our conversation. Jake was watching us now, a puzzled expression creeping across his face. Anderson looked over at him. then back at me. He was clearly torn. "Miss Thompson," he said gently, "I know this is your daughter's big day, and I respect your privacy, but this isn't right. Half the people in this room work for companies you now own, and they've spent the entire evening mocking you." He wasn't wrong. The Hendersons. Quantum Solutions, acquired in January. The Patels, Data Flow Systems. That was March. Jake himself worked at Sterling Tech Mine. I felt a strange mix of vindication and heartbreak. I'd built something real, something powerful, and yet my own family saw me as a sad little woman clinging to faded relevance. Just then, Jake started walking toward us. He wore that casual, dismissive smile he always used when he thought I needed encouraging. "Everything all right over here?" he asked. You two looked deep in conversation. Anderson looked at me for permission. I gave a tiny nod. "I was done hiding, Jake," Anderson said carefully. "I was just getting to know your mother-in-law's business background." Jake chuckled, oblivious. "Oh, that?" he said with a shrug. "Yeah, Diana's been having fun with her little consulting gig. It's kind of cute how seriously she takes it." Anderson blinked. "Cute," he repeated, his voice clipped. Jake nodded. "You know how it is when people start over later in life. You gotta support them even if they get a little carried away." He gave me a patronizing pat on the shoulder. "But we cheer her on, don't we, Mom?" Anderson stared at him, expression blank. Then slowly, he turned to me again. "Miss Thompson," he said quietly. "May I?" I nodded. Anderson turned back to Jake. "Jake, I don't think you fully understand who you're talking about." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Anderson took a breath. "Your mother-in-law isn't dabbling in business. She is business. Diana Thompson is D. Thompson of DT Enterprises." Jake stared at him, silent. "She owns Sterling Technologies," Anderson added. "She owns the company you work for." Jake's mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. "You're joking," he finally said. "She drives an old Honda. She lives in a tiny apartment." Anderson didn't miss a beat. "She chooses to live modestly. Serious investors often do. It keeps their focus on strategy, not lifestyle inflation." By now, people had begun to notice the shift in tone. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Jake was pale, lips parted, stunned. "She's not just a small-time consultant," Anderson continued. "She's acquired 6 companies in the past 18 months. Your mother-in-law isn't just successful, she's your boss's boss's boss." It was like watching a tree fall in slow motion. Jake's body didn't move, but you could see his entire world tilt. His confidence, his smug superiority, all of it crumbled in real time. He stood there blinking, fish-mouthed, and speechless. Anderson looked around, taking in the still laughing guests, the clueless expressions. Then something changed in his face. Resolve. He turned toward the microphone, and I instantly knew what he was going to do. "Excuse me," Anderson said, his voice cutting clean through the noise as he stepped up to the microphone. The music stopped mid-beat. Forks hit plates. Chatter dissolved into stunned silence. "I hate to interrupt," he continued, "but I just had the most unexpected and remarkable conversation of the evening, and I believe it's something that needs to be shared." 200 heads turned to look at him. Rachel blinked, clearly confused. Jake looked like he'd just swallowed his own tongue. And I sat still, heart pounding, knowing this moment was no longer mine to stop. "I've just learned that the woman many of us have been joking about tonight," Anderson said. is not who we thought she was. In fact, we owe her an apology." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Diana Thompson is not some hobbyist dabbling in business to stay busy. She's Dee Thompson." Gasps rippled across the room. Someone actually dropped a glass. "In the past 18 months alone," he went on, "she has acquired 6 companies, including the one I work for, Sterling Technologies, where I serve as coup." Rachel's face turned pale. Jake looked like he wanted to crawl under a table. "This woman, who we've all treated like someone playing pretend," Anderson said, his voice rising slightly, "has quietly built a business portfolio worth over $50 million. And we, her friends, her family, her colleagues, have spent the entire evening laughing at her. You could have heard a pin drop. Until the chaos broke loose." "What?" Rachel shrieked. People began whispering in clusters, swiveling to stare at me. The Hendersons exchanged frantic glances. The Patels sat frozen, jaws slack. Even the DJ looked stunned, hovering awkwardly near his booth. But Anderson wasn't done. "In fact," he said, "many of you in this room actually work for companies that Miss Thompson now owns." So while we were chuckling at her so-called late-life dreams, we were essentially ridiculing our own boss. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Then a wave of murmurs spread across the tables. People shifting in their seats. Nervous laughter. A sudden and undeniable discomfort hanging heavy in the air. Rachel was staring at me now, her mouth moving but no words coming out. Finally, she managed to squeak, "Mom, is that true?" Before I could speak, Anderson gently lowered the microphone and looked at me. "I think Miss Thompson should answer that herself." He offered me the mic. I stood slowly, legs trembling not from fear, but from something much stronger, resolve. And I took the microphone from his hand. I stood at the front of the room, microphone in hand, every eye locked on me. My voice shook just slightly as I began. "Yes," I said, steadying myself. "It's true. I am Dee Thompson, the founder and CEO of DT Enterprises." The room exploded, gasps, chairs scraping back. People whispering, pointing, trying to piece together everything they'd heard just moments before. But I didn't stop. "I know this may come as a surprise, especially to my family," I continued. "But I've chosen to keep a low profile because I believe in letting my work speak for itself." I turned toward Rachel. She looked like she didn't recognize me. "I didn't share this with you," I said gently, "because you asked me not to talk about my business tonight. You were embarrassed by what you assumed was a little side project. I respected your wishes and kept quiet." Rachel's voice cracked. "But you said you were doing consulting." "I did," I said softly. "I never said small business consulting. That was your assumption. You assumed I wasn't capable of doing something big because of my age." The room was so quiet I could hear someone's fork gently clink against a wine glass. "When you joked about my so-called midlife crisis," I went on, "you were mocking a company that now employs over 400 people. When you said my goals were unrealistic, you were dismissing something that had already been accomplished." I turned to Jake. He looked completely gutted. "Jake, I know you meant well," I said carefully, "but you assumed that I was just playing around. That I needed encouragement to chase small dreams. You never imagined I might have already succeeded." He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "And Rachel," I added, turning back to my daughter, "you didn't just get it wrong," you laughed. "You stood in front of 200 people and reduced my life's work to a joke. You told everyone my dreams had an expiration date. That's not just hurtful, that's cruel. She was crying now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. And still, I didn't raise my voice. I spoke clearly, calmly, firmly. I let it happen tonight because I didn't want to take away from your moment. But I also won't let my story be rewritten as some sad woman's desperate grasp at relevance. I built something real. I earned the respect I now receive not because I demanded it, but because I worked for it. I paused, letting it all sink in. Then I smiled softly and looked out over the room. And now, I said, let's get back to celebrating this beautiful couple. I handed the microphone back to Anderson and returned to my seat. The room slowly returned to its hum of conversation, but the energy had changed completely. Suddenly, the same people who had spent the entire evening patting my head with pity were now lining up to shake my hand. The man who'd compared my work to his mother-in-law's Etsy store stammered an apology. Miss Thompson, I owe you one. If I had known. It's all right, I said, offering him a gracious smile. But deep down, we both knew it wasn't. Not for Rachel. She sat quietly the rest of the evening, barely touching her cake, eyes puffy and fixed on her lap. She was unraveling, realizing in real time just how wrong she'd been. And not just in private. She'd made her mistake loud. When she finally walked over to me, her face was blotchy and red. Mom, she whispered, voice trembling. I don't even know what to say. I feel awful. I looked at her, my daughter, the same girl I used to braid hair for on the first day of school, now standing in front of me, unsure how to fix what she'd broken. It's your wedding day, sweetheart, I said. Let's not let this ruin it. But I humiliated you, she said, tears falling again. I mocked you in front of everyone, and you just sat there and let me do it. Because I didn't want to take the spotlight away from you, I said. Not because I didn't feel it. She buried her face in her hands. What kind of daughter does that make me? The kind, I said slowly, who cared more about being embarrassed than about understanding who her mother actually is. You didn't just get it wrong, Rachel. You chose to believe I couldn't possibly be more than a sad, aging woman clinging to a fantasy. My tone wasn't angry, but it was honest. She nodded slowly. Ashamed. I know, she whispered. And I'm so sorry. I looked at her, really looked. And I saw someone who had a lot to learn. But maybe also someone ready to start learning. I love you, I said, but we've got work to do if we're going to rebuild this. The next morning, as they left for their honeymoon, I knew things between us wouldn't go back to how they were. But maybe that was a good thing, because for the first time, I was no longer shrinking to fit inside the space my family had made for me. I was finally standing at my full height. 6 months after the wedding, life looked very different. Jake had started calling me Miss Thompson at family dinners. He even asked for my input on a pitch his team was struggling with. Funny how quickly someone's tone changes when their job security is tied to your approval. My sister. She stopped lecturing me about being realistic and instead started bragging to her friends. Apparently, I'd gone from a midlife dreamer to her high-powered businesswoman's sister overnight. It's amazing what a little public revelation can do. As for Rachel and me, that took time. She came back from her honeymoon acting like nothing had changed, but I held my ground. I wasn't going to pretend it hadn't happened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lash out. But I made it clear. Things would not just reset. We began family therapy, yes, At 62 years old, I dragged my 34-year-old daughter to counseling. Because being a powerful woman means you don't just set boundaries in boardrooms. You set them at your dinner table, too. And Rachel, to her credit, she showed up, she listened, she apologized, again this time without an audience watching. It'll never erase what happened, but it's a start. And while all that was unfolding, my business kept growing. Turns out being publicly outed as a corporate powerhouse is incredible marketing. 3 different guests from the wedding reached out for consulting contracts within 2 weeks. One of them even sent a thank you note for the most memorable business pitch they'd ever seen. Unintentional branding, but I'll take it. Mr. Anderson. He's now one of my most trusted executives. He handled the aftermath with professionalism and grace and a quiet sense of told you so whenever someone tried to walk back their earlier remarks. And me, I'm still driving the same old Honda. Still living in my small apartment. Still showing up to meetings early with handwritten notes and a firm handshake. Because success doesn't have to look flashy to be real. These days, when someone asks about my so-called career pivot, I just smile, because I know what they don't yet. At 62, I learned the most valuable business lesson of all. Never underestimate a woman who's finally done being underestimated.